Welcome to our Week 3 College Football on Fox Spaces with me, RJ Young, and Geoff Schwartz, brought to you by Wendy's. We're going to go through 4 of the biggest games of the weekend, starting with, one that is very near and dear to me, which Oklahoma-Nebraska. But first, Geoff, how was the Wendy's, brother?
It was delicious. It was, a little bit of bourbon on there, a little bacon, a little cheese, all that. And, to me, anytime you add fried onions to something, it just kicks it up a notch. Just a little notch, a little crunch in there. I loved it, man.
Bourbon bacon cheeseburger, folks, get on it. It's scrumptious. You know what else is scrumptious? Our big noon kickoff game. That would be our nooner. That is number 6 Oklahoma at Nebraska. The rivalry is renewed. Your man's is fired up about it. He's wearing his Oklahoma Letterman jacket for the show today. Geoff, are you as fired up about this game as I am?
I am, because I want to see Nebraska with a new energy, right? Like, I think they have pieces there, but clearly it was not working. And it tells you that, obviously, when the results show that, obviously. Look, by the way, good for Clay Helton, okay? Clay Helton is the nicest human of all time. And, he just wasn't right for USC. I'm glad he got that win. I like Clay Helton, put it like that. But Nebraska needed a new energy, man. They need a new voice in the room. They need something different. And they were willing to swallow the buyout, which I think was the right thing to do. They have plenty of money. That's not a problem for them. And so I think that we don't know what Nebraska is going to be this weekend, which makes this game even more exciting. We know what Oklahoma is going to be, right? They're going to try to push the ball on offense. They play better defense, I think, and they're getting it in that direction more than they maybe ever have been. But for Nebraska, right, like, what are they going to be without Scott Frost? They could go in 2 directions, right? They could either fire themselves up, play over their skis, or maybe they're just not good. I mean, it's also possible that they get this burst in the first quarter and just return back to what they've been. So that, to me, is the most fascinating part of this game is what is Nebraska now without Scott Frost?
I think it's a great observation. I'm curious as you are to see what Nebraska is. They elevated Mickey Joseph to head coach. He is the first Black coach in Nebraska athletics history, full stop. Wow. As he comes into this game, which is, I'm sure, one of the biggest games of his career, as he played quarterback at Nebraska in the early 90s, not unlike his predecessor, Scott Frost, who led them to the 1997 national championship. But he also has made some changes. Like, he decided that, Mark Whipple's going to keep calling the plays. I'm going to be head coach. He elevated an offensive analyst to wide receiver coach, which is a position that he once held. And he has asked his defensive coordinator to become the safeties coach, and he's made their secondary coach, their cornerbacks coach. And one of the things that I really enjoy is he said, we're going to start hitting in practice. We're going to start tackling, because that has been one of the real Achilles heels of this team. They just haven't been able to put people down on the ground. Now, that said, as good as Nebraska might be, Oklahoma should not have a hard time with this team, which is why I'm so worried. Okay. Look, against Kent State, Oklahoma didn't score until the last 18 seconds of the first half. Kent State, people. Now, on the one hand, they scored 33 and they won 33-3, which is the fewest amount of points that they've allowed to an FBS opponent in 5 years. But if you go up to Lincoln, Nebraska, and you don't immediately get on top of Nebraska, they're just going to hold the ball. Like, tell me what you think about this, Geoff. Oklahoma holds the ball 22 minutes and change a game. It's the second to last in FBS because they go so fast. They also run 30 fewer plays. If you know that as a Nebraska head coach, why would you even want to do anything other than run the football and run the football with authority?
Well, because you have to keep up with Oklahoma if they get into a situation where Oklahoma scores points, right? Like, that is, the plan, I think, when you play a lot of these teams, especially like USC right now, right? Like, I love to run the ball, take the air out of the game. Well, eventually when USC scores 40 points, you got to score 40 points too. And so Nebraska can have this game plan all they want of slowing things down, of running the football, of pacing things out. But if you allow 2 touchdowns on Oklahoma's first 2 drives, you're down 14-0 now. That pace is going to pick up a little bit, right? There's going to be a sense of urgency now because you limited your possessions, and Oklahoma now is off to a very fast start. But RJ, look, to me, Oklahoma's defense, not surprisingly, is much better this season so far. I know it's Kent State, I know it's UTEP, but to me, that is so far been, I think, what people maybe expected, but it's a good sign. If your offense is kind of taking a little bit of time to figure things out, new OC, new quarterback, bunch of transfers, guys in and out both directions, but you can always rely on your defense being good, which is something in Oklahoma you haven't been able to do for many years now.
It's a great observation in that he basically had the same sort of pieces that were in place last year, and they seem to be a little bit more fundamentally sound and really able to just snap and run to the football. I'm still worried, though, because I just haven't seen them against a good team. Now, that said, you point out how great they've been against UTEP and Kent State. I'll throw this at you. Oklahoma gave up 35 to Tulane last year in one game, okay? Yeah. They've given up 16 points all season long, so I'm happy to hear that, but I would be shocked if the schooner does not cut through Nebraska like an international harvester in a high-yield cornfield, all right? Like, it's just the way it's supposed to be. But
I'm with you there.
On top of that, I want to ask this. I know this rivalry means everything to me, and I have so many memories of what it was once like. Does this rivalry resonate with you as you're growing up in LA?
No. I mean,
okay.
I mean, okay. I grew up a UCLA fan. I mean, it was UCLA USC. Like, that was a rivalry. And even, you know, like SC Notre Dame, right? Like, those were the rivalries that that I looked at, you know, Michigan, Ohio State. I don't remember much like Big 12 in my family. Like, I mean, I'm sure we watched the games, but I don't remember like any childhood memories of those games. I always liked, obviously, look, again, UCLA USC, Notre Dame. I just always liked watching games in November in the snow. Being from Los Angeles, like, never seen that. I played in one of those games in my 12 years of playing football. And so I loved the Big Ten in the snow. I mean, again, not the prettiest games, but it was so much fun to watch as a kid. Like, I felt like that was real football in the snow outside. I don't have many memories of the Big 12 other than, UCLA beat A&M a couple times. They lost Oklahoma when I was a kid, I think, as well. They lost Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl. So a couple times we played them, but I don't remember the rivalry as being something that I know that you believe it is.
Well, you're welcome for Troy Aikman, because that was a gift from Oklahoma to UCLA.
Correct.
Right. Yes. And on top of that, there's lots of other great OU Nebraska memories that I could pull up, but I'm excited to see what this actually looks like on Saturday. I expect it to be a sold out game. I expect it to be a great atmosphere, but I want to turn our attention to another important game on the schedule, a top 25 matchup on the schedule, and one in which I know you are personally invested.
Yes.
Number 12, Brigham Young at number 25, Oregon. How do you feel about Oregon going into this game, Geoff?
I don't know. We did what we had to against Eastern Washington. We scored in the first 9 possessions. So here's the problem, is that I'm going to steal a line from my buddy Dan Rubenstein, who covers football for the Solid Verbal, former Oregon Duck as well, good buddy of mine. He called the Oregon offense a pickleball offense, right? Where basically it's just kind of in this short little area, it works just fine. But when you expand it out, you see the issues. And that's my take so far on this team, is like, defensively, they were better against Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington can score, guys. They scored the first team defense on 7 points over 3 quarters. So I'll take that after, obviously, the Georgia game. We tackled much better. It seemed like Dan Lanning was more personally involved in the defense than he was in game 1. So I think they're making some changes there as far as defensively. But offensively, they just don't trust Bo Nix. It's very evident. They set him up for success sometimes, but on third downs, man, like, they're running these mesh screens and like things. I'm like, it's Eastern Washington. Can you work on something else? Like, you're going to run that against Georgia, which they did. You're running against BYU. Like, let's get the ball down the field. And the offense just seemed disjointed at times in the past. Again, we scored on the first 9 possessions. We scored points. So to me, like, you play a BYU team that's very physical, that wants to get everything in the front 7. I think the passing game, we have better athletes on the edges to make plays in the passing game, to move the ball, if we can get that done with Bo Nix. And I just don't see right now the faith that I have in Bo Nix to make that happen. Maybe the coaches do, and maybe they're quote saving things, which doesn't really happen, in my opinion, as much as we think. And so to me, it comes down to that. BYU offensively, obviously, they are kind of the same boat as Oregon a little bit here, especially if they don't have their top 2 wide receivers. I don't know the status of those guys heading into this game. We know they scored 26 points in overtime against Baylor. If they don't have those guys, they're kind of in the same boat as Oregon, right? Where they're kind of in this smaller, trying to move the ball in chunks of 5 to 7 yards. And so I think Oregon can defensively play that much better, obviously, than a team that is trying to do what Georgia did to them. So we have better players. I don't know, man. I gotta see more from Bo Nix to feel comfortable in Oregon's ability to win this game. I think everywhere else we're going to be fine, but can Bo Nix make those special throws? Because BYU can score. They have a little trouble last week without their two top receivers, but it's a veteran team, and they're going to want this game. A lot of kids, in the region that grew up Oregon fans that maybe wanted to go to Oregon that weren't able to do so. It's in Autzen Stadium. BYU won all 5 of their games against Pac-12 teams last season, so they're going to be very confident heading into this game.
I'm really interested to see what this game means once it gets done, because if Oregon is able to knock off an undefeated BYU, I think that's going to speak well of not just Oregon, but of the Pac-12. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that BYU went 5-0 against Pac-12 opponents last year. But if they get this victory, if the Cougs are able to get this win on the road, what do you think stops them from being a team that contends for the college football playoff?
The bias that we have against group of 5 teams. I mean, like that, another independent, and they'll be, out of that situation fairly soon when they go to the Big 12. I mean, you know how I feel about this situation. Like, I would just take the 4 best SEC teams. It's fine. Like, it's fine with me as a Pac-12 guy, but their schedule, they get Wyoming, Utah State. They're at Notre Dame. They host Notre Dame. That game is much different now, right? Arkansas feels like a spot where Arkansas is going to be favored in that game. But yeah, they don't have a schedule where there's a lot of losses, at least penciling in right now after Oregon. Utah State has not been as good as last year. Obviously, they just got waxed by Weber State. Obviously, the Irish. If the Irish find an offense that makes that game more interesting. Arkansas, I think, is really good. So yeah, there's a couple places they might trip up, but if they beat Oregon, yeah, they're going to be looked at as a fringe playoff team.
I think that they are absolutely a playoff team looking at the schedule that they're playing. You mentioned Arkansas, Oregon, Baylor. That's stout right on its face. And the Mountain West is nothing to sneeze at. It's where they play a lot of their competition alongside those Pac-12 teams staying within their region. I also think that they get to say, hey, we were as good as Cincinnati was in 2020 for the last 2 years. And if they're looking for a 4th team to get in there, far be it from me to say that Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars do not deserve an invitation to the college football playoff. The second top 25 game on the schedule this weekend, number 13 Miami travels to number 24 Texas A&M to play at Kyle Field. Is this a coffin nail game for A&M's college football playoffs hopes if they lose to Miami, Geoff?
Yeah, but they're going to lose other games this season. Like it's not like think about A&M. Like it's so surprising to me. I was looking this up yesterday as we were talking about them on some of the shows I was doing. Do you know how many times they've won 10 games in like the last 25 years?
I want to say it's like 4, and they're mostly in the 90s, early 90s, Southwest Conference.
It's like 2 in the last 25 years. Like they're this team that every year we get this hype of like, they're so good. They recruit well, but okay. Like I gotta see more, especially offensively, right? Like, where's the production from the quarterback? Jimbo's supposed to be a quarterback guy. Where's the production from the quarterback? Where is that solidified? It's not like App State went in there and just like gimmick their way. They kicked their ass. Like App State kicked their ass in Kyle Field. And guess what Mario is going to do in Miami? I watched this for 4 years now. He's trying to do the same exact thing. He's going to try to go in there, and they have some issues on their offensive line and whatnot. They're not as good as they were at Oregon right now. They're doing the same exact thing. They're going to run the football. They're going to try to beat them on the line of scrimmage. I think that we're seeing so far in Miami, and according to their fans as well, like kind of this at times boring-ish offense, which is what happened at Oregon as well. But there's some wrinkles that Mario puts in the game every now and then, especially in a big game like this. This one's at A&M, obviously. A&M has better players. Don't get me wrong. They certainly do. But Miami's going to come in there with the exact same game plan. They're going to try to run the football down their throat and play really stout defense. And in that type of game, I think Miami has an opportunity with the better quarterback, again, to get this done on the road.
You were saying that you think, maybe you're being serious because we never actually hammered this part out, but about the 4 best teams playing in the college football playoff for the national championship. The reason I frame that up is, do you think that this is a good referendum on the strength of the SEC versus the strength of the ACC when we're talking about Miami and Texas A&M, 2 teams that we don't expect to win the conference championship, but aren't the worst teams in the conference either?
It's probably more of a good thing for the SEC if Miami were to win this. For the ACC, because they're supposed to be first or second team essentially every year. It hasn't been that way, right? But ideally, you'd want Clemson and Miami, and I guess Florida State in that same respect to be kind of the big dogs in your conference. To me, the SEC is fine if A&M is not. Kentucky's really good, guys. They're really good, right? Georgia, obviously. Alabama seems not as good as previous years, but they won a game that most teams would lose. They won their stinker, right? Arkansas is a good football team. Mississippi State's a good football team. Like, there's plenty of teams in this conference, in the SEC, I should say, that are really good. They're upper echelon teams. ACC needs this win to kind of put Miami in that position, okay, we hired the right coach, or I think they did anyways, but you feel better about that hire, obviously, with a win in this situation. You feel validated with the way your program is going. And again, where's the offensive production from Jimbo? You're an offensive guy, you're a quarterback guy. You got to get something going at A&M.
I'm fascinated to see whether Haynes King or Tyler Van Dyke win the pitcher's duel. I think most people would expect Tyler Van Dyke at this point, but I've seen Haynes King be outstanding at times. Just haven't seen it at all this year. Perhaps he raises his game against a top 25 opponent like Miami in a way that he didn't against Appalachian State. Last game on the schedule for you and I, number 22 Penn State at Auburn. First thing that jumped out for me is this is the first ever Big Ten team to play at Jordan-Hare Stadium at all, right? Which I thought was fascinating. Also, you got Penn State was able to knock off Auburn last year. You had some turmoil at Auburn in the offseason, but hey, man, look, Auburn has won its last 17 straight home games against non-conference opponents. How do you think this one shapes up?
Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder if last weekend for Auburn, they were kind of in a look-ahead spot to this game, right? I mean, they struggled in San Jose State, and I don't know if that's indicative of their program right now, or just, again, they have a huge matchup with Penn State coming to town and possibly wearing orange jerseys and mixing things up and whatnot. So I think these teams are pretty evenly matched, right? Penn State obviously has gone on the road so far and taking care of business at Purdue. Offensively, I don't know how inspiring they are at times, especially with the quarterback situation they have. Their offensive line still kind of working through a lot of things over the years. That was a strength of theirs. Hasn't been so much. They haven't run the ball terribly well. They haven't pass protected terribly well, but defensively, they're kind of doing enough to make it work. And Auburn, I feel like it's sort of in that same boat right now, where offensively they wish they were able to do a little bit more, especially kind of big plays and finding ways to create explosive plays. And defensively, they're doing enough to keep these games. San Jose State scored 16 points. So they feel to me like sort of the same team. I don't know how they feel to you. And I kind of lean toward the home team in that matchup.
I watch a lot of Big Ten football, and I've been really aching to see when Penn State was going to have the sort of identity that I thought they might have 2019 when they made the Cotton Bowl and absolutely destroyed Memphis in that season. And I saw one thing checked off the box here. I'm gonna do the Jimmy Breslin right now. Jimmy Breslin once said, "If you don't toot your own horn, there is no music." I told folks that Nick Singleton was going to be this year what Travion Henderson was last year in the Big Ten. And he showed up against Ohio. He went for 179 rush yards on 10 rushes and became the first Penn State tailback to rush for more than 100 yards since November 2020. It'd been that long at Penn State since they had a tailback that could do that. And I thought that this was the best comp to Saquon Barkley that they have had there since Saquon was drafted. And he's just as strong. He's just as lethal. National Gatorade Player of the Year. And then you have a defense that I don't think is bad. Like, quite as kept, Manny Diaz's secondary has been outstanding. They have 25 pass breakups. They had 9 against Ohio. I understand it's Ohio. 9's still a lot for me. I think if the Penn State team that I think they are capable of being shows up to Auburn and turns this into a rock fight, Penn State can win that sort of football game. That's what they ended up doing against Purdue. They turned it into a rock fight. And if that's what you have to do to go win, then do that and continue to be Penn State football.
It's just the Barkley Singleton comp is good because the offensive lines are exactly the same, right? I mean, look at yards before contact, right? So that's just a kind of a metric to tell you, is the offensive line doing their job? Are they giving you opportunity to run through open holes? And the answer is no. 1.6 yards before contact. I mean, if you're a good team in college football, you're maybe at 3.5, 4, something like that. So, again, they're able to run the ball with their running back being really good, but I worry against an Auburn team that has a stout defense, if that's enough. And can they rely on Clifford did it at Purdue. So I got to give him his attaboys for that, right? He was able to come through in the clutch there, but it's going to come down to a couple throws from Clifford on the road. So I think same way Auburn will look at this game as well. Can Clifford do that? He did against Purdue. Can he do that here?
It's a very good question to ask because against Purdue, we also saw him get knocked out for a little bit. And then we got to see Drew Allar come in and absolutely throw rifles for passes. And we see the future is very bright for Penn State in that situation. But I'm really interested to see what Sean Clifford does here because this is the first time he's had the same offensive coordinator for 2 consecutive years.
Yeah.
Mike Yurcich was outstanding at Oklahoma State. He was pretty doggone good at Ohio State. Now I think he's going to have them in a position to succeed. On the Auburn side, do you need more out of TJ Finley, their quarterback transferred in from LSU, or do you need more from Tank Bigsby? Or as you put it, good defense, right? Owen Pappoe, it's the linebacker leading that defense. Which one of those players, Owen Pappoe, Tank Bigsby, or TJ Finley, do you think needs to have the best game for Auburn to win its game against Penn State?
I mean, it's got to be Finley, right? I mean, he only has 34 pass attempts so far this season.
Right.
In 2 games, which is not a lot. His air yards per attempt is 4 points. Adjusted air is 4.7. Like, that's abysmal, especially in college football. I mean, that's got to be higher than that. 1 touchdown. I'm not so worried about that. But 3 interceptions so far against Mercer and San Jose State. It's got to be him, right? I mean, Tank's played well. He's at almost 7 yards a carry. He's done his job. But in a game where I imagine Penn State's going to say, look, we're going to shut down the run and force you to beat us, he's got to be that guy. He's just got to do it. And they don't ask him to do a lot. Again, as I mentioned, 34 pass attempts, not a lot. And to me, it comes down, if you're asking me who's more important, it's got to be the quarterback in the spot.
I really think that Joey Porter Jr. is going to have a lot to say about how good TJ Finley plays on Saturday. That would be what I think is the best defensive back so far for Penn State this year. I got to see him play outstanding football against Purdue with a wide receiver core that I expect to be pretty good. If you can rush TJ Finley, you know that you can beat TJ Finley. The problem I see for them is what do they do when the plays break down? Because that is also a big man that is able to outrun most of the people that are chasing him. Fascinated to see what James Franklin looks like in his return to SEC country. Remember, he got to Penn State, turning Vanderbilt into a winner. That's still one of the things that I find mind-boggling about his career path is that, no, I went to Vanderbilt and I won. That is why I'm the head coach at Penn State. Meanwhile, it feels like Brian Harsin is in a very difficult position in which this is just a game that you have to win to be able to show the folks at Auburn that you're the right guy for this job. But again, I want to compare conferences here. Do you think that this game is a referendum on the strength of the Big Ten versus the SEC?
I don't, maybe. I mean, you kind of got upper middle tier programs here. No, probably not. I mean, I think we judge a lot of this by the top of the conference, in the end, right? And these teams are not going to be the top of their conference, in my opinion. So it's probably not a referendum on either squad. As far as nationally speaking, obviously it'd be great for one side to win for recruiting and kind of bragging rights. It doesn't have the same feel as like Utah, Florida, right? Where it felt like that just meant so much to the Pac-12 conference that, would have been nice to win that game. I don't feel that any fan of either conference will feel that way after this game.
I want to push back, but just on this point of, I don't think Penn State can afford to lose this game because they play in the second best division in all of football. In that Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, all ranked. Maryland is undefeated, right? Rutgers beat Boston College this year. I'm saying that it's going to be a terrible look for Penn State in particular, and perhaps even for that division and let alone the conference, if they drop a game to an Auburn team that I guess you and I would expect them to go perhaps 6-6 this year. And that would be a good season for them. So I am inclined to believe that this means more for Auburn to win it, and it could be that much more for Penn State to lose it. So I would like to see both of those teams act as if that is the case. All right. That is going to do it for this week's Spaces, our college football weekly talk. I am RJ Young. He is Geoff Schwartz. For the folks at Wendy's and Fox Sports, we will see y'all same place, same time next week. Deuces, folks.